We're here today to talk about The German Wife. I'm Donna Allward. I'm here with my bestie and fellow author, Barbara Tanner Wallace. Barb and I have published somewhere around 100 books combined, sold, I don't know, somewhere around 3 million, Barb?
I think it's about that.
Yeah.
Worldwide,
One of
13
the best
languages.
Yeah. One of the best things about being published together was that that's how we met. And then, we became besties and kind of sisters from another mister. And now we're doing Step Into the Story together, which is so much fun. So again, tonight's show features our monthly book pick, which is The German Wife by Kelly Rimmer. And we're going to be chatting about it for about the next half hour. This is your first book by Kelly, am I right?
It is. She is one of those authors that's been on my list forever. And I know you read The Warsaw Orphan, I think?
The Warsaw Orphan, yeah.
And you were raving about it. So you had suggested this one for the read, and it was a really different take on World War II, so I was kind of into it. I really probably will be reading more of her.
Yeah.
She's a great writer. I won't gush too much right now. I will gush in a few minutes, but yeah.
Yeah, as we dig in. I will say, though, this book was really different from The Warsaw Orphan.
Oh, yeah?
Although, how she writes is consistent. Like, it was consistent voice and how she sort of constructs a story. That was pretty consistent. But this is a whole different kind of storyline with tough choices for the characters. And of course, the last one was centered in Poland, and this one is actually mostly either in Berlin or in the U.S. So it's different subject-wise, although her style is certainly consistent. So,
I like when authors do that, because there are some authors that I've read and they tend to write the same story.
Yeah.
And, they have their core story that they write, and their books all kind of have the same feel. And, I'm always going to do World War II, and it's always going to be very similar or whatever. So I like when they jump around and do different things.
And mix things up. And at the same time, if their style and even if their core story, like their themes are similar, if they mix it up but they keep the other stuff consistent,
yeah,
and you still know what you're going to get for, like, you're going to enjoy that person's story, right? Because your storytelling is consistent, even if the subjects change.
But they're not, and it's not predictable, which I like. So
yeah. So for those of you watching who haven't read the book yet, and I highly recommend you do, the book is about two women, both living in the southern U.S. in around 1950, and both of their husbands are part of a space program. And so Lizzie is married to Calvin, and she and her brother were raised in the Dust Bowl, so went through the Depression. And Sophie, on the other hand, is married to Jürgen, and he's a rocket scientist who came to the U.S. through a program that brought German scientists over after the war. And his job during the war was to develop rocket technology for the Nazis. And so the book alternates between 1950, when Sophie and Lizzie meet, and do not get along from the first time they meet. And in the 30s and 40s, following the stories of both women in the lead up and during the war and their circumstances. So, overall impressions, Bart.
Okay, so a couple things. First, this is where I do gush, because she made me sympathize for the SS officer.
Right?
And I'm thinking to myself, only the most brilliant writer could pull off where I'm reading this book. I mean, I have Jewish relatives. I mean, they're in-laws, but I have Jewish family. And I was like, I'm actually sympathizing with this woman. When I remember I texted you when I first started the book, and I said, I'm going to have trouble with this, because I knew that was where it was going. Yeah. And I'm like, given, the family members I have, I'm not sure I'm going to groove on the, hey, Nazis, awesome type of thing. But she really pulled it off. And so I think she's brilliant. And this is a funny story, but I was telling Peter about it and telling him, my husband's, for those who don't know, he's an engineer, an aerospace engineer. And he was like, oh, so that's about Werner von Braun and the Redstone Arsenal and Operation Paperclip? I'm like, yeah, basically. Yeah. And that is who the Sophie's husband's based on, is Werner von Braun, who's the father of rocket science. And it's important only because it's not that he's just a rocket scientist. He is the rocket scientist.
Right.
Rocket science would not exist without Werner von
Right.
Braun, and that's who she based it on.
Right.
So my overall impressions were that one, Kelly Rimmer is awesome. Two, I really liked it. I didn't think I would. It's not something where I wasn't rooting for either protagonist, but it was one of those books where I couldn't wait to find out what happened next. She did have me wondering what was going to happen to people, and I felt for them. I didn't root for them, but I felt for them. I was very emotionally attached, especially to Sophie, and I'll explain that after.
Yeah. We'll
I really liked the book. I know it's a big pick on Amazon, and I went on, and it's got something like 1,200 reviews or 4,000 reviews, something like that. 90% of them were 5-star reviews.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone who read this was like, okay, hey, you pulled it off. We really now understand what was going on up in Germany.
Well, and I think I also really liked it. And I wasn't sure I was going to, especially in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I found the beginning of it, especially Lizzie's point of view, so being in the depression and that, I found it, I just wasn't connecting. And I know we talked about that early on, how, and then I don't think we're necessarily meant to. So for me, this was a book that made me think. It made me uncomfortable, even as I was rooting, I in some sense, for the characters. It was complicated, and I appreciated that. So I think once I got further on and I started looking at the book as a whole, I became even more sort of awestruck about how she wrote that and how to pull that off.
I will say this at the beginning when she's doing the Dust Bowl, and that was I really loved those chapters. Then I was liking Lizzie better. Like at the beginning of the book, I was really enjoying Lizzie at the beginning because I really felt for that.
Yeah, see, I didn't.
Where they were digging, or there's a scene where the brother goes digging because they are convinced the water's deep in the ground, and he gets about 4 feet down and realizes, no, there's just 4 or 5 feet of dust.
Yeah, it's still
and that sort of stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, what these people went through. And so I was really feeling for that whole family for like the first few chapters. I was like, oh, I couldn't figure out how she was going to tie it together, but I was like, wow, these poor people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I felt sorry for them, but I wasn't connecting with them at all. So, so I think that really shows us, though, that this book is really all about character.
Yeah.
And so, which character did you like the most, and why?
I liked Sophie, the German wife. And I was telling you off screen, this is my theory why. Okay, these women are two sides of the same coin. They're both doing whatever it takes to protect their families and protect the ones they love and care for the ones they love against the outside world. The thing is, we know Nazis are evil. I mean, we know that from history. We saw what they're doing. And when you think of Sophie trapped in this no-win situation, where she really didn't have a choice. I mean, they tried a couple times. She had no, and I know someone who was in a similar position and had no choice but to capitulate. And you realize, okay, she's facing evil, and it's understandable why she felt trapped. Sophie had more choices, Lizzie, I'm sorry, had more choices, and her actions more kind of codependent and enabling. And so it was hard for me to really sympathize. Like, she made these choices, and I get that she made them because she loved her brother and she's trying to protect the ones she loved, but she had other avenues, as opposed to Sophie, was really faced with cooperating or dying, basically. Yeah. And I think that the scene that hit home with me, there's a scene where and I was looking for it, I can't find it, but the quote was something about how she's talking about, in order to save her son, she was going to have to allow him to learn how to hate. Yeah. And hope that she could save him later when this was all done. Yep. And like, you realize, because if she doesn't let him go to school and learn all this stuff, she's condemning him to death. Yeah. And it's like, wow. And that's when I realized, like, these people she was really in a no-win situation.
Yeah. I think I liked Sophie the best too. And because I found Lizzie, like Sophie, despite having to make these horrible choices, which really was no choice, right? It was either you either do what you need to do to survive and go along, or it's not just you who whose life is at stake, it's your entire family.
Right.
So but she, even through all of that, she still had a softness to her, but Lizzie was a very hard individual, and
Was.
there wasn't much softness about her.
But I think that, and I think that's why we got to see this stuff about the Dust Bowl to kind of explain why. I think she would have been super unlikable if we hadn't heard about how hard it
Yeah,
was.
and it's very clear that particular day that happens.
There's a
with
huge
parents.
thing that happens that hardens her, but I think she was hardened
Right.
before that because they were basically eating like potato scraps. And
Yeah, but I think that particular trauma, I think, probably formed um, a lot of her choices as she went forward, as far as protecting herself
yes,
and protecting Henry, her brother. And but it didn't. It did make it harder for me to really sympathize with her, or and I think it was just because she just seemed so, like, there was just a sharpness to her that
yeah.
that Sophie didn't have.
Oh,
Um,
and I was going to say, I think one of the reasons it worked for Sophie, again, going back to because this guy was the Warner von Braun character, where he was the big guy, made it more obvious that they had no choices. The Nazis were never going to let this guy go.
no,
Whereas if he was just, Joe Klein, average German guy, you would have said, well, you have lots of choices. But he wasn't. He was something that they wanted to hold on to.
and I think so much of like, we look at the conflict in the story, and there's so much that is informed by the war.
Yep.
And then also in the 1950s timeline, about how Americans would feel about Germans coming over and forming a community within their community. So, which totally understandable, but I think too there's a theme of, like, in order to save the people that you love, you end up betraying yourself and your own moral code.
Yep.
Which is a lot of what Sophie does and Jurgen does.
And Lizzie does.
And Lizzie does, when it comes to Henry, particularly when we get toward the end. And she has to make some pretty big choices about Henry.
I think she did it, though, all the way through the book, because she put both of them were playing a role.
Yeah.
Sophie was playing the role of the good German wife, and Lizzie was playing the role of the good scientist's wife.
Yeah.
And neither of them were that.
And the good sister.
Right.
And almost a parenting role. But again, when you said enabling, that's 100% with Henry. And so, but I think there is a pivotal moment toward the end where you really see, like, the choice she has and whether to betray her actual true moral code. And I mean, that's a big turning point for her. So.
Yeah, she really lost me for a few chapters there.
Yeah.
I was like,
but came around in the end, right? Like, came around in the end, but yes, without giving too much away. But I guess too, like, we were talking when you and I were talking about this, as we were reading it, and the idea that moral choices.
People should know we spend the whole book texting each other, like, what page are you on?
We do. Like, what page are you on now?
I'm not liking this. We'll keep going a little further.
Yeah. Talk to me when you're on page 150.
Yeah.
But how, like, moral choices aren't always black and white. And the fact that she did pull off making Sophie and Jurgen sympathetic characters. And
because Sophie made some pretty awful, I mean, what she and her husband chose to do they were pretty bad choices.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like they were innocent. They saw a lot of stuff and kept their mouths shut about a lot of stuff.
But they also, but I think the reason why it worked as far as making both of them sympathetic was that they also did other things. So I think the character of Mayim really, and the fact that they didn't want to be part of the party, and that, and this is slightly spoilery, but that, there is one point where they do want to escape and make a plan that doesn't come to fruition.
There's a couple of them. I think that was great of her, because that made us, like, they weren't just lying back and saying, "Oh well."
Right. They weren't drinking the Kool-Aid.
No,
right?
and so
But it
she was doing a few things that she should, if she got caught, was going to get her in trouble.
right, because she's filtering money and helping out and doing it behind the scenes and hoping not to get caught. So there's a number of things there that help inform us as far as like choosing to be sympathetic toward them. At the same time, I was still really uncomfortable with some of the stuff that they knew was happening.
Oh yeah.
But then what were they going to do? Like you said, it's a do or die thing. So this is the whole moral gray area. Like, what would you have done in that situation? And I can't say that I would have done anything different.
Me neither.
And like there's
I think that was the point, because I think my husband and I talked about this when I was saying something about Nazis, and he said not every German was a Nazi, and which is true. And it was something like only a small percentage actually drank the Kool-Aid.
Right.
But the rest had no choice but to say they drank the Kool-Aid, because otherwise you were gonna, God knows what was gonna happen.
Well, and there's
a collaborator with the Jews, or whatever they would do.
And I am going to get spoilery. I'm sorry. I'm going to get slightly spoilery and try to be a little bit not too detailed. But there is a part where, Jurgen has a choice to make, and probably would have made what we would consider the right choice until they threaten his children.
Yep.
And, and I remember you and I, of course, when we were talking, saying like it's one thing to condemn yourself to death, but it's quite another to condemn your children or, the rest of your family to death for your choice.
Yep, exactly.
So, and like, I get it. So it's, there is a moral gray area there. And then you can see this in Lizzie's choices too, when, the only family she has is Henry, and she would do anything for Henry. And Henry was in the war and came back changed.
He was bad off before he left. They made that
choice. He was.
And she was, it's not really spoiling so much his character background, is she was basically told, take care of Henry.
Yeah.
By her mother, because her mother pretty much said, the men in this family are weak. We have to take care of them.
Yep.
And then given what happened right after that, I think is why she enabled. It's just harder to, which is, I think it was the hard edge to her that made it.
Yeah. And honestly, it's, when you look back on it after you finish the book, you realize that Lizzie always was trying to look out for Henry. It's just that she wasn't doing it the right way.
Right.
So, which honestly, Lizzie just needed some therapy.
Which they didn't have in 1935. Yeah. 1935, no one knew the word enabling or PTSD. So I think that.
Right. And honestly, I got to say that I'm actually going, well, I think you and I had a brainstorm about this. Why we're besties. But a brainstorm about this in the book that I'm writing, because I'm like, I can't really say that, she's made this choice because of, trauma and whatever, because that's not, that terminology isn't what they'd say in 1917. So it's finding other ways to communicate that. So,
well, and I think the attitude was different too, because so many of them went through it. And I think that generation's attitude was, we all have it, suck it up and carry forward.
Right.
And, they drank to cover it up or whatever they did. But so many of them had that attitude of like, or they would go to the American Legion and talk it out among themselves and tell the funny stories or whatever they wanted to tell. But there was so much, I mean, you had relatives that fought in the war. I had relatives that fought in World War II and in World War I. And it was just not something anyone talked about. They just, they had their bad moments and they moved on. And I think she does that in the book. Like, he had a bad day.
Yeah.
And doesn't she say that Lizzie's father fought in the war?
I don't remember.
I don't remember if he fought in the Great War or not, but it would make sense if he did. So he would have those kind of bad days. Yeah.
I think he might have, and
God knows they came back damaged. Those guys.
Right. So yeah, I think just so the book for me is, it was a difficult story, but also worth it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's a story where, you're meant to necessarily root for characters. You're just meant to maybe understand them better. And so it operates on sort of a deeper level there. Um,
Well, you made the comment, you're like, I'm rooting for Sophie in a way, and I feel really guilty about sympathizing with Sophie because
right.
of the stuff she's going through. And then you're seeing the stuff she's seeing, and you're like,
Right. And it's like I'm uncomfortable feeling connected to this woman who is, not not doing anything necessarily to stop what's happening, but also understanding that she was kind of powerless to do anything to stop what was happening, and she was trying to protect her kids, which
Yep.
as a mother, duh.
What did you think of the neighbor?
Oh, which neighbor?
Lydia, the good Nazi. Like
Oh.
I say good Nazi in the sense of like she drank so much Kool-Aid.
Yeah, no, she was not a good person. She was a
No. She was just a really good Nazi.
Yeah. Honestly, okay, so I don't want to spoil this part, but I kind of low key loved what happened in the end.
Me too. Like,
So, yeah, she was a piece of work, but karma. In a
some of
way,
the stuff I
it's
learned,
just-
like you must have at least 8 children to be.
oh my
You
god!
got an
right?
award. You got an award from the Fuhrer
I
for
know,
having
it was like some mother's victory cross or something. Like, oh my god, I wish I'd written it down. But yes,
I
you
know.
got a
They're like,
special
oh,
award
no
if
medal for you. You only had 4.
um.
That's stuff I didn't know about, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Me too. And I did learn stuff in this book that I didn't know about before. And so, I mean, that's always an added bonus when you're reading history, is that you learn little things that you never learned before. So, but yeah, Lydia was something, and I loved Adele
I did too.
and Mayim.
I did too.
And so, it was an interesting sort of. I mean, I will read another of hers for sure, because I will expect an incredibly well written, nuanced, make me think kind of
Yeah.
read while still being entertained.
The only thing I didn't love, but I understood from both a writing standpoint and from a human being standpoint was
Yep.
At the end, there's a little bit of a happy ending that
Yeah.
I think because as a person, I'm just not that I know Kelly Rimmer or anything, but it feels like she wanted there's certain characters that you want to have a happy ending. And so she gave them it.
Yeah.
Rather than just a satisfying ending, she gave them happiness. And there was 2 or 3 characters in this book that deserved good things. And she is particularly one. And she gave that person good things. And it felt like it was a reward to Sophie. Like, oh, she was, and even Kelly Rimmer writes in the end, I'm not entirely sold that Sophie deserved it, but I think she felt that other woman deserved it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
without
so.
spoiling anything. And it's, I don't mean to, it wasn't a bad ending. I just realized I'm like, it's kind of tacked on. But then I said, I think it's because she felt like, well, this had to get done.
But if she hadn't done that, it might have ended with more resonance.
I think people would have wondered what happened.
But I guess
the character she had to wrap up, we needed to know what happened to.
But the truth is, most people wouldn't know.
No.
Right? So, and honestly, she wrote such a truthful book that I think it would have worked the other way.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah, but it's fine the way it is. I wasn't unhappy with that, but I understand her reservation. I know. I always feel like when we're doing these segments and we're trying not to spoil things, I always feel like we're vague booking. You know what I mean? And people are like, I don't know.
We're subtexting. Yeah.
Right? Like, but I don't want to spoil anyone else's enjoyment if
they would really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's definitely become a top of the list buy. If you haven't read her, you should. I'm really not making it up when you go. She has mostly 5-star reviews for this book. If not, there are 4s. There's a couple 3s, and it was because they had trouble. And I think that, if for example, I have some friends that I probably would not recommend reading this book to because there'll be some triggers in it.
Yes.
And those people might have picked it up and said, ooh, hit a trigger and not reading it. And I respect that. But I think for the most part, people will read it and find it illuminating. You know, similarly to like some of the books we've read by like Vanessa Riley and Piper Hughley, where it was stuff we didn't necessarily want to know, but we should know.
Yeah. And then you had brought up too, because it is unusual to have a main character be a Nazi, really, even though like joining the party was not really their thing, but they were still forced into that world.
Right.
Oh, and one other point I made to you was, for example, most people love the sound of music, right?
Oh yeah.
But what would have happened if instead of after the music festival, you know, Georg hadn't escaped and he had been captured, and if he had, it says right in the movie that, you know, to not go along with them would mean death for all of them. So what if they hadn't escaped? What choices would they have made? And you know, like, do you compromise your principles to save your family? Like, so it's hard, right? But you had said like you wondered if Rimmer being Australian made a difference in how she was able to approach like the U.S. and the German.
Yeah, I do, because I think maybe there was some distance.
And maybe, although, I mean, Australia was, of course, also an ally. So, you know, I'm not sure, but.
I don't know. I don't like she makes a very good point in the book, and it's not spoiling anything, but she makes a very good point that like America's house wasn't exactly clean. You know, we had segregation going on. We weren't exactly the land of purity and moral uprightness.
And the moral high ground.
We weren't on the moral high ground for a lot of things. And she basically points that out. And I think that she was more comfortable doing that as an Australian, because as an Australian, you get to see that America's kind of talking out both sides of its mouth in this case. Although, again, I can imagine what it must have been like for the people in Huntsville to have all these German scientists show up after they just lost, you know, millions of young men fighting the Germans.
Right. I don't think I'd be that welcoming either. Like I said, I wouldn't be either. I could understand the points of view of every character, and that's wise, because, you know, humanity is flawed and messy, and
she does such a great job of doing that, though.
Yeah. I can't it's got to be hard to write, and she does it brilliantly.
And she does cover all the different points of views, and you know, her character is so steeped in what was going on in Germany. So even worse, because they did have, even the Germans were upset. It was, I cannot say Kelly Rimmer's brilliant enough times. Maybe I could tell
again. I will. My TBR is huge, I'm not gonna lie, but I would, like, if I were out and I saw one of her backlist books, I would like grab it. You know, I would go back and read more of her backlist. And
probably has another one coming out in another year or so. I suspect these take.
Oh, I'm sure. I need to read faster. My TBR is up.
Well, the good news is it takes historical fiction authors a couple of years to put one out. So.
Yeah, I know, but when you keep finding new authors, it's just like, I know. And then you find them and you realize they've got like 7 books out already, and then you want to go read all of those. So speaking of authors that we might have heard of but haven't read yet, our December pick is Jennifer Ciavarini's Christmas Bells. So we went.
No World War II. No World War II.
I know, right? So, and this one is basically taken from Longfellow's poem, "The Christmas Bells." Right? I heard the bells on Christmas Day. The whole. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's sort of the influence behind this one. We found Christmas historical fiction. I haven't read her before. I've seen her books in the bookstore, and came so close to picking them up multiple times. So I'm kind of excited to delve into one of her stories.
Fun fact: when I worked at the bookstore, we had a male customer who's like, she was his auto buy. He would come in and ask when her next book was out.
Nice.
which was really unusual. He's like, Jennifer Chiarini, does she have another book yet?
What
And,
was the one that was out like maybe 3 years ago?
Lincoln's Dresser was a real big one.
Okay, the one before that.
She did Switchboard Resistance or Switchboard. And then she did The Resistance Women.
The Resistance Women. That was the one I was thinking of. The cover for that was so gorgeous. And we had it on a special end cap. This when I worked at Indigo. And I would go buy it and I would touch it or I'd restock it and I'd think, I really need to buy that. And I never did. So I'm going to test her with this one and then maybe go back and get it. So, yeah, we're going to do that on December 6th, you and me.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Our next video chat is coming up on the 22nd, right? A week.
Yep.
And this is our writing room. And in honor of Thanksgiving and Christmas and Black Friday sales coming up and all that good stuff, we're going to pull an Oprah and do our favorite things. The writer's version, so gifts for Christmas and holidays for writers and readers. And but you're not going to get anything under your chair. Like, you get a card, you get it. That's not going to happen.
No, we're not giving out cards, but we are giving you suggestions that you could give your significant
right. And hopefully some links, and then we'll like probably go crazy in the comments afterward, pasting links to like some of the stuff that we found, and then hopefully my credit card won't take too much.
Some of the stuff might be on our list. We're not lying.
Yeah. Well, too bad for you because I already got your Christmas present. So
you already told me yours. She told me what to buy her. So
yeah. So I just have to ship it now. So that's coming up on the 22nd, I guess. And for those of you watching, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Please, we would like subscribers.
Yes, and then we can get our own dedicated channel name.
Yes. Then we can have one, and then we can become. We're small, but we want to be mighty.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So go ahead and subscribe. Then you'll find out every time we have a new broadcast.
That's it. Sign up for alerts too. Then you'll know.
Yep. And I think final word on The German Wife is highly recommend.
Highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. One last thing, because I like doing this at the end. What are you reading right now?
Actually, I just got it. It's called The Stolen Life of Evelyn Aubrey by Serena Burdick. And it's a book you and I looked at. We were flipping through.
Right.
And it's about a woman who's going through her mother's things after the earthquake of 1989. She never knew who her father was. And she finds a book of poetry by her great-great-grandmother, who she never knew because it was on her father's side. So she's like, I didn't know I had a poet. So she goes looking for more information about her family history. And it also tells the story of that great-great-grandmother who was the wife of a very famous author around the Downton Abbey time. And I saw a lecture of her this week, and she was saying it was supposed to be 1850, but they're like, push it up a little. 1850 seems a little bit far away. So, but it's, she took her 17 years to get this book published. She worked on it for years and revised it. It was tons of work.
Is this a debut?
No, she's written like 6 other books, and they finally took this book. She's been trying to sell it.
Okay.
It was a work of love. And it sounds really, really interesting, and I'm kind of psyched to read it. It just came out this week, so I don't know much about it other than the storyline sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought I'd seen books by her before, so I didn't think it was a debut. But when you said it took that long, it's like, oh wow.
Yeah, she told the story, but I mean, and I empathized with that because she told about how much she had to rip apart from the original version once they bought it, and like storylines disappeared.
That scares me.
But the book itself sounds really good. So it's called The Lost. What did I just say? The Lost Book of Evelyn Aubrey.
Very good. I'm reading the Lost. Speaking of Lost, the Lost Summers of Newport. That's the right title? I think my brain just did a little. But that's Team W. So Willie Williams and White. And so I'm probably about halfway through. So I'm reading that right now. And then I'm also reading, because I have book club on Wednesday, which is locally authored, which is, I guess, tomorrow after this podcast. I'm reading Birth Road. So I'll probably post about that in the comments.
Yeah, I'll post my review as well when I finish.
Yeah. So I'm reading that, and then I have one more book in our book reading challenge. So
I do too.
yeah.
The
So
longest
for those of you watching, Barb and I are almost done the Step into the Story reading challenge for this year, and you can find that on our Goodreads page, or actually, I think we have that as a pin post in the Facebook.
Yeah, and we will do our dueling reviews of the books because we haven't
Yeah.
really shared what we thought of the books. So we
Yeah,
dual
yeah.
reviews.
Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing. This is our entire review. Like the entire last 10 minutes have been, one last thing. But our former co-host and our really good friend Renee Ryan's book, The Secret Society of Salzburg, which she talked about all this year, is now available pre-order. It is getting tremendous reviews, advanced reviews. I have an advanced copy. I haven't read it yet. You have an advanced copy, and you haven't read
an
it.
advanced copy. Yep.
Because we know the author. But I know
we haven't here.
Starred review. A couple other places gave it starred reviews. I've started to see things coming out now. The publisher held the reviews back till this month, but she's getting a lot of buzz about this book. We love her. We loved her first book. So it's available for pre-order. You can get it on Kindle for $9.99. I think the book itself is $17.99. So I'm always going to Kindle.
And it releases December 27th.
Yeah, next month it'll be out on the 27th. You'll have it you'll have it ready for you right after the holidays when you're sitting around tired and need something to read.
Yeah, when you're still in your turkey coma after Boxing Day.
Exactly.
Boom. So, all right.
All right, and we'll put a link to these books in the comments so that you can find them.
Yeah.
And we will see you
next
month to talk about Longfellow's poem.
That's right.
All right.
All right.